During the coldest, harshest time of year, a monster stalks the snow-covered forests of the north. It is winter incarnate, selfishness personified, and hunger embodied. Half man, half spirit, and all nightmare. It is driven by an appetite that can never be satisfied, an undeniable craving for the flesh of that which it once was, an insatiable hunger for human beings. With its ice-covered heart and frostbitten skin, it is impervious to the deadly cold. Possessed of supernatural size, strength, and speed, few of its intended victims survive to tell the tale. So, if you find yourself wandering the wintertime forests of the north, beware the winter weather, beware the threat of hunger, and beware the Wendigo. Hello there, friends, and welcome to the Paranatural Podcast. My name is Ben.
And I'm Jake.
And we are glad to have you with us tonight as we talk about one of the Native Americans' most terrifying monsters, the Wendigo. How you doing tonight, Jakey boy?
Oh, I'm doing good.
All right. So I think first order of business, we have 2 new patrons on our Patreon.
Woo!
Yeah, right on. So I would like to thank Derek Sheetenhelm and Leilani English for joining the Patreon. And if you would like to help support a couple of guys trying to bring some entertainment into the world, you can find our Patreon. The link is in the description below or on our website, paranaturalpodcast.com. If you do decide to join our Patreon, it is $5 a month. You will get bonus content, a shout out on the show, and for a limited time only, a limited print sticker that we are never going to make another run of again. I don't know how many of them there is, so I can't tell you how many there is. So get in there and get your sticker. Got anything for tonight, Jake?
Get that fucking sticker.
Get the sticker.
Limited edition.
Limited.
It's gonna be worth $millions someday.
I don't know about that, but it is pretty cool. It is a pretty cool fucking sticker.
Yeah.
I think that's all we got to start with. So, you got anything?
No, I'm
all right. Let's do this.
I'm ready.
So tonight we are going to talk about the Wendigo.
Ooh.
Creepy. So, if you're not familiar, a Wendigo is a creature in the folklore of some of the First Nations people in North America. Now, there is a very, very great deal that can be said about the Wendigo. If you study it and the lore behind it, it actually delves into the spiritual beliefs of these particular Native American tribes. We're not going to get into that because I don't want to spend that much time doing this podcast. So we're going to do some broad brush stroke stuff here today and have a little fun with it. Now, fair warning, it does get just a little bit gruesome. So I tried not to be too graphic with my depictions, but it does get gruesome. Now, another reason for having to do a lot of trimming for this episode is that legends of the Wendigo are extraordinarily widespread. Tribes from the northeast section of the United States, the eastern part of Canada, all the way through the Great Lakes region, and even into the northern Great Plains, all told tales of the Wendigo. There are 37 words that describe the same creature, and that's just the ones that start with W. Now, that being the case, there does have quite a bit of variation from tribe to tribe and person to person on descriptions of the Wendigo. So what I did was stuck with the most common kind of tropes that went throughout and chose stories that depicted those tropes. So like I said, there is a lot more you can learn about the Wendigo. If you're interested in us doing more on the Wendigo, let us know. You can send us an email, paranaturalpodcast@gmail.com. Use the contact form on the website or get in the Facebook group. And if you do want to hear more, we can do more on the Wendigo, but I tried to just keep it to the entertaining parts. Now, a very modern and common depiction of the Wendigo shows a creature that is partially rotted, humanoid, and has a deer's head and deer's antlers. I think a lot of people have probably seen that. However, that is not at all the traditional depiction of a Wendigo. A more traditional description is given by Basil H. Johnston, who was an Ojibwe teacher and scholar from Ontario, Canada. He describes it saying, quote, "The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation. Its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones. With its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep in its sockets, the Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody. Unclean and suffering from suppuration of the flesh, the Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption." End quote. So that's a more traditional description of the Wendigo. However, according to enough of the folklore that I felt it necessary to add it, the Wendigo could also be a giant. This is because in these legends, it was said that the Wendigo would grow in proportion to what it consumed. So for every bite of a human being that it took, it grew the exact amount of that bite. This would always keep it hungry, making its hunger insatiable and making it extraordinarily dangerous. It was said when these creatures are spoken about that they could grow to heights of 15 feet, or in some rare tellings, 70 to 80 feet tall. That's one big person eater. I don't think I'd want to fight an 80 tall Wendigo.
I don't think I'd want to fight a 15-foot tall Wendigo.
I'd rather fight a 15-foot tall Wendigo than a fucking 80 feet tall Wendigo.
I want to find a small starving one. Hiding in the tops.
Itty bitty one?
Yeah.
A 2-foot tall Wendigo.
Give me a grasshopper sized one.
I have a story about one.
Good.
Now, like I said, there are some variations, but most commonly, a Wendigo is a person who becomes possessed by a Wendigo spirit. There are a few ways that a person could become possessed. And one of the not as common ways, and one that a lot of people don't really talk about, is that they could become possessed when a shaman sends a Wendigo spirit after them. Now, most of the stories with this happening, it happens when a shaman felt insulted by being denied a request for a wife. Now, in many of these tribes, I say many, I think it's actually all, it was common for men to have more than one wife. So we'll just keep that in mind. So in our first story of Wendigo possession, a powerful shaman wished to marry a young woman, but her father felt that the shaman had enough wives and he had already promised the girl to someone else. So the insulted shaman made an effigy of the young woman out of snow, dipped it in water, and let it freeze solid. Then he buried the ice sculpture in ash and called upon the Wendigo spirit to inhabit the young woman, using the effigy as a link. So kind of like a snow voodoo doll. The shaman told the girl's father that she would not live long with her future husband and would destroy him. Shortly after the marriage ceremony, the young woman became sick. She refused to eat, became feverish, and started complaining about dreams of ice, all of which are telltale signs of Wendigo possession. After weeks of this, her husband came home from hunting. He entered the lodge and she sprang upon him and killed him with an axe. By the time others arrived, she had already eaten half of her husband's back. Having clearly gone Wendigo, the people in the village saw no choice but to kill the young woman. They beheaded her with an axe and burned her body.
Back straps are the best. I don't blame her.
I mean, I don't think they had divorce as a custom, so that's an option.
Still is, right?
In another case, a father denied the shaman because he felt his daughter was too young to marry. Weeks later, the young woman came home in the afternoon and found her mother still in bed with her infant sibling. She found it strange for her mother to still be in bed that late in the day, so she called for her to get up. Her mother did not stir, but the young woman could see the baby moving beneath the blankets. She went to wake her mother, only to find the woman's body cold and lifeless. She threw back the blankets and saw the infant covered in blood. The baby had gone Wendigo, and by the time the young woman discovered the grisly scene, it had already consumed one of its mother's breasts and was working on the other.
Out of milk, I guess.
I told you it gets a little bit grisly, a little gruesome. That's probably the most gruesome it gets, but I couldn't help but add that story. It was just so like yeesh. So that's what can be done if you piss off a shaman. So 0 stars, do not recommend. So in this case, the girl ran for help, obviously. And people from a nearby village came and dispatched the Wendigo. After it was dead, they saw that ice had formed along the length of the child's backbone. So that is something that happens when someone goes Wendigo. Their heart and backbone get covered in ice. So just an interesting bit of the legend there.
I want to know how they dispersed of it.
How they dispatched it?
Yes.
They chopped it in little pieces.
Well,
I didn't want to say that, but you asked, so
yeah.
I mean, we're like hacking up babies on this show now. Jesus Christ.
I gotta know how to deal with a grizzly infant.
If the baby goes Wendigo, what are we supposed to do? So, like I said, attacks by conjurers they're not the most common form spoken about in Wendigo lore. More common ways to get possessed by a Wendigo were by the weakening of a person's spirit. This could happen by various means: dabbling in dark magic or practicing divination without proper training and protections were 2 ways a person's spirit could become weakened and susceptible to Wendigo possession. Being a greedy, selfish person was a more common way, but the most common was hunger. This is what happened with a Cree man named Koki C. Kuchin, or Swift Runner. Now, Swift Runner's story is probably the most covered and talked about Wendigo story ever. That being the case, I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights if you want to know Swift Runner's story again, let us know, and I will do a more in-depth version of it. But you can find his story if you just Google Wendigo stories. You're gonna hear about Swift Runner. So what happened was, like most winters, Swift Runner took his family into the wilderness, which was something that the tribes at that time would do. They would come together in the summer when food was more plentiful and you could gather berries and nuts and things from the forest. But in the winter, no one area could sustain a lot of people. So they usually dispersed into family groups or, just smaller groups in general. So like he did, all winters, Swift Runner takes his family, they go out in the wilderness. But the difference was when spring came, Swift Runner returned alone. He claimed that his family had starved to death due to the winter being longer and more harsh than normal, and game being more scarce. This was a believable story, and unfortunately, not an uncommon thing for those times. However, people noticed something that made them question the man's story. This was Swift Runner himself, who looked healthy and well fed. Authorities made him take them to his winter camp, where they found the remains of his entire family with obvious signs of having been butchered. In a court of law, Swift Runner claimed to have been possessed by a Wendigo spirit when he murdered and ate his family.
I wonder if that would hold up in the court of law today.
It did not hold up in a court of law then.
No.
A lot of our Wendigo stories, like this one, they actually come from a time when white people were taking over in Canada, and the natives were coming more and more into contact with whites and white law. So a lot of it happened with these Wendigo cases. The people involved were tried for murder because, of course, according to white man's law, you have to dispatch a Wendigo, you're killing a person. We'll get to that.
Right.
So that's actually where we get a lot of our information on Wendigo, is from newspaper and court documents from the 1800s, when the whites and the natives were starting to mingle a lot more. Now, Swift Runner's case was something of an exception to the usual tales of Wendigo transformation, because when he came back, he was still sane and lucid. And that's generally not a thing that happens with Wendigos. Generally, a person infected by the spirit would go mad, only becoming lucid in short bursts, where they would beg to be killed before they could become dangerous. Generally, the Wendigo transformation would begin with dreams. The spirit-infected person would talk about having dreams of ice. They would also dream of being offered food. Invariably, the food would be meat. Finally, they would grow increasingly sullen and begin refusing to eat. At this point, it believed the transformation could be reversed, though. Most commonly, the infested person would be made to drink melted bear tallow or bear fat. This was said to have the ability to melt the ice that was forming over the heart and spine of the person, thereby reversing the Wendigo transformation. But if this was not done in time, the person would go mad and become violent, and the only cure would be death. So that is what they believed. And a lot of when you read Wendigo stuff, that's what you're going to get, is stories like that. And such was the case of a man named Moose Tooth. It was the winter of 1899. A band of 32 people were camped at Smoky River in northern Alberta. Despite the fact that all 32 people were crammed together in 2 shacks and 2 teepees, everything was going fairly well. That is, until a well-liked man named Moose Tooth began telling people that he was afraid an evil spirit was getting the better of him, and that he feared he would turn Wetiko, which was this particular tribe's name for the Wendigo. He added to this that if he should begin to turn, he wanted to be killed, so he would not destroy his children. As happens in close quarters in the winter, several members of the tribe got sick. The sick men were brought to the teepee of the medicine man. Among those were Moose Tooth and a man named Napasis. I'm not sure if that's exactly how it's pronounced, but that's what I'm going with. Healing rituals were performed, but they did not help Moose Tooth. Soon he began to take on a frightening appearance. His eyes began to roll in his head and took on a mad glittering. He seemed afraid to look anyone in the face and muttered constantly to himself. He was overheard saying, "I look on these children as young moose and long to eat them." Suddenly viewing loved ones as game animals was a telltale sign that a Wendigo spirit had wrapped its icy grip on someone's soul. In a last-ditch effort to free the man's spirit, a special medicine lodge was quickly built. All the skill and power of the tribe went into trying to heal the afflicted man. From sundown to almost midnight, they sang medicine songs, drummed, and danced. It seemed to be working at first. Moose Tooth lay quietly on the floor. But suddenly he shouted out, "This night you will all die," and his eyes began once more to glitter and roll in his head. He began to thrash wildly and screamed, "If I get up, I will kill you all tonight." With alarming speed, he sprang to his feet. "I will kill you all. I will not leave one alive," he screamed. The medicine man declared that it was hopeless and instructed some of the assembled men to hold Moose Tooth as best they could. Several men struggled to restrain Moose Tooth. He whipped his head back and forth, attempting to bite and tear at people as if he were a wild, rabid animal. Everyone was afraid, for they knew that the Wetiko was truly among them. A woman named Eliza jumped up with a medicine bag in her right hand and an axe in her left. She ran up and smacked Moose Tooth several times in the chest and face with the medicine bag. Then she handed the axe to a man named Chuck-a-Chunk, who used it to split Moose Tooth's skull.
Fitting name.
There's some names in here, buddy. I left out the medicine man's name because I straight couldn't say it.
You gave me crap for not trying to pronounce that Icelandic island.
It was like 37 letters long.
That's it?
Yeah. Anyway, Nape-Susis, who was the guy we talked about earlier, his name I also can't say, then plunged a knife into Moose Tooth's body and stuck an axe in his chest. A man named Payu heard the screams from outside and rushed in to see what was going on. Someone handed him an axe, and he immediately smashed it into Moose Tooth's head. Obviously, Moose Tooth was dead.
Oh, that's what happens.
That's what happens when you get smashed twice in the head with an axe, stabbed, and then axe in the chest, generally. But despite being obviously dead, when asked by the court what they did next, because this was another case that did eventually go to the courts, Nape-Susis, whatever, said, quote, "We sat around the body until daylight," end quote. They did this because they fully expected Moose Tooth to rise, and they wanted to kill him again if he tried to get up. Now, the rising of the sun did not end this tale, as you would think it would. The tribe was not convinced that a Wendigo could be killed so easily and knew he would be dangerous until the lump of ice around his heart was removed. Napesusis and Peyu drove a stake into Moosetoos's dead body, pinning it to the ground. They boiled tea, removed the stake, and poured the boiling water into the hole to melt the ice. Okay, I'm with you. If you got an ice heart, you got to melt it.
Right.
After this, they attached chains to Moosetoos's legs and picketed the chains into the ground so that if he wasn't dead, he would be unable to get up and chase anyone. This story very much highlights how terrified these people really were of Wendigo, people going Wendigo.
Yeah.
It's kind of fascinating. All of this was attested to by multiple witnesses in a court of law. So, just keep that in mind. Still not satisfied of the tribe's safety, Napesusis took an axe and cut off Moosetoos's head just to be sure he was dead, and even if not, to be sure that he couldn't eat anybody.
Dear God.
Yeah, he went full send on making sure the Wendigo couldn't get the fuck back up.
Shit.
Yeah. That's how afraid of these people were. They would go to some extraordinary lengths to make sure that a suspected, Wendigo was dead and stayed that fucking way. There's actually quite a few stories like that.
Wicked.
Now, like I just said, there are many stories of Wendigo possession that end like the story of Moosetoos, as it was seen prudent to kill a Wendigo as soon as possible. And this is because if they were allowed to begin feeding on human flesh, they became much harder to deal with. Once fully transformed, a Wendigo was said to possess superhuman strength, speed, and stealth. This despite their gauntness and massive size. They also retained much of their human cognitive ability. According to legend and lore, a Wendigo could lure potential victims into the forest by various means. They could imitate the sounds of a baby crying, make noises like an injured person in need of help, or call out to their intended victim by name. My podcast partner and co-host is shaking his head at me right now and looking rather ill around the gills, if you will. And if you would like to know why, I would like you to remember they could imitate the sounds of a baby crying. And I want you to take that memory, head on over to our Patreon and listen to the episode of Jake's personal stories. That's all I'm going to tell you. If you want to know more, head on over to Patreon. All of that, though, is not the extent of a Wendigo's potential intelligence. One story tells of a giant Wendigo who captured a boy. Instead of eating the boy right away, the monster kept the boy in a cave, feeding him in order to plump him up. The creature fed his captive all that the boy could eat and would use a knife to cut into the back of his hand and check the thickness of the boy's flesh. But the boy was not fattening up fast enough for the creature, and he was running low on supplies. So he sent the boy to a nearby village to beg for food. The boy, of course, immediately begged for help from the village warriors. At first, they didn't believe him, so he showed them the cuts from the Wendigo, checking the thickness of his flesh. This convinced the men, but they were still undecided what to do. That is, until they heard the Wendigo calling from the forest for the boy to return. A few of the braver men ventured out and found the monster. They battled it, eventually cutting off the creature's legs and leaving it for dead. After a number of days, they went out to make sure the creature was indeed dead, only to find it laying on the ground, eating its own severed limbs. The men asked the creature if there was any fat on them, to which he replied, "Of course there is. I've eaten many of your people. No wonder they are so fat." The men killed the monster, cutting him into little pieces and ending the giant once and for all.
Boy who cried Wendigo.
The boy who cried, but he was right though.
Yeah.
So there you go. That is where I chose to end our dive into the Wendigo story, because if I'd have gone any further, we'd be here for 700 days while we talk about, the cultural implications of Wendigo belief and this and that and the other thing. But so that's where I'm going to end the Wendigo. What do you think, Jacob?
Yeah. Definitely makes me think back on a certain experience.
You have to go check out the Patreon for that one.
Yeah. Creepy shit.
What's even worse is, like, I live in Wendigo territory. At least you got out of Wendigo and it's cold as hell outside right now.
Yeah, it's like 46 here.
It's like 26 here. I don't even know if it's that temperature right now.
Well, hopefully you got an axe and boiling water with you.
Yeah, got an axe and some water. There are other ways to kill Wendigos, though.
Please tell.
So, like, the number one way, like, if they actually go Wendigo and they transform, the main way to kill them is by fire.
Purification by fire.
Wendigos are made of ice.
Ah, makes sense.
And so fire will dispatch a Wendigo. But there's also prayers and hacking them into little pieces and things like that. So, yeah, I'm not afraid of no Wendigo. I can make a fire.
Yeah, I'm gonna pour some gas on my tomahawk and light it on fire and hit him with it.
There you go. That'll do her. That'll fucking do her, bud. Fuck that Wendigo right up.
Yeah. Hopefully it ain't 70 foot tall.
If it's 70 foot tall, you're going to need a tomahawk missile.
Yeah. Well, we know why wildfires are happening. Just trying
to fucking whack a Wendigo.
Yeah, just trying to kill out the breed.
Oh, all right, Jacob, my boy. Anything else?
No.
All right, then this is where we turn it over to you, our listeners. If you have any thoughts on the Wendigo or you want to hear more about Wendigo, let us know. The website's a good place to do that, paranaturalpodcast.com, or you can jump in our Facebook group. We are in there interacting whenever we can be. So we hope to see you there.
Oh, and a special request from the viewers. Mosey on over to the website, and if you look up this story and or some of the stories that Ben said, want to try to butcher these pronunciations of names, put that little record button down on our website and say them. I would love to hear them.
There you go. Yeah, if we mess up names, you want to leave us a voicemail and correct our dumbasses, or try, feel free. That would actually be really fun.
Yeah.
Good call, Jacob. Good call. All right, unless you got anything else to add, then we will sign off. We will sign off for the night. Thank you for listening. We love you, and good night.
Love you guys and gals.